The hidden camera. Dash. The rain tapped relentlessly against the windows, creating a symphony of whispers that filled the otherwise silent house. Emily sat alone in her bedroom, the soft glow of her laptop casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was just another ordinary evening, or so she thought. Emily had always prided herself on her attention to detail, a trait that served her well in her job as a detective. But tonight, it was something mundane that caught her eye. While dusting her nightstand, she noticed a peculiar glint from the corner of her room, where her bookshelf stood. She approached it, curiosity piqued, and found a small, black device hidden behind a row of old paperbacks. It was a camera. Her heart raced as she picked it up, her mind racing with questions. Who put it there? How long had it been there? She quickly searched her room for any other hidden devices, but found none. With trembling hands, she connected the camera to her laptop, desperate to uncover the truth. The video files were numerous, dating back months. She watched in horror as the footage showed her most private moments, sleeping, changing clothes, talking on the phone. Every aspect of her life had been recorded without her knowledge. Panic set in. She was being watched, and the voyeur could be anyone. Emily's mind flashed to recent encounters with neighbors, friends, even delivery people. Could one of them be the culprit? She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Determined, she started to piece together the clues. She remembered the maintenance man, Todd, who had visited a few months ago to fix a leaky faucet. His visit seemed routine, but now she questioned everything. She recalled the way his eyes had lingered a moment too long, how he had asked too many personal questions. Emily grabbed her phone and called her best friend, Sarah, but there was no answer. She sent a frantic text, urging Sarah to call back immediately. Alone in her house, she felt the walls closing in, the darkness of the night amplifying her fear. She decided to check the rest of the house for any other hidden cameras. As she crept through the dimly lit hallway, every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Her paranoia grew with each step, her imagination conjuring horrific scenarios. She searched the living room, the kitchen, and finally the bathroom. Nothing. Just as she began to feel a slight sense of relief, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything stupid." But Emily couldn't wait. She needed to confront Todd. She grabbed her car keys and headed out into the stormy night, her heart pounding in her chest. She drove through the deserted streets, the rain-soaked road glistening under the streetlights. As she pulled up to Todd's apartment complex, she noticed his truck was missing. With a mixture of fear and determination, she decided to break in. She picked the lock with surprising ease, her hand steady despite the terror gripping her heart. Inside, the apartment was eerily silent. She moved through the rooms, searching for any evidence that might link Todd to the camera in her bedroom. In his bedroom, she found a locked drawer. She pried it open with a letter opener, and what she discovered made her blood run cold. Inside were photographs of her, candid and invasive, alongside a collection of small, black cameras identical to the one she had found. As she stood there, frozen in shock, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, and came face to face with Todd, his eyes wide with surprise and something darker, malice. "Emily," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I didn't expect you tonight." Before she could react, he lunged at her, and everything went black. Dash. Emily woke up to a pounding headache and the sensation of cold metal against her wrists. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself in a dimly lit room, her hands bound to a metal chair. Panic surged through her as she realized she was in Todd's basement. The walls were lined with old, rusted tools and strange, unsettling objects that hinted at a sinister side to his seemingly normal life. She strained against her restraints, but they held fast. The sound of footsteps approached, and her heart pounded in her chest. Todd appeared in the doorway, a twisted smile on his face. "Good morning, Emily," he said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "You really shouldn't have come here. Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" Todd chuckled, the sound sending chills down her spine. "You were always so curious, always poking your nose where it didn't belong. I couldn't resist the challenge." He moved closer, and Emily could see the madness in his eyes. "You see, Emily, I've been watching you for a long time. Learning everything about you. It's been quite entertaining." Emily's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. She needed to buy time. "People will notice I'm missing," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Sarah knows I came here." Todd's smile faltered for a moment, But he quickly regained his composure. "I'll deal with that when the time comes," he said. "For now, let's just enjoy our time together." He pulled out a small, remote-controlled device and pointed it at the corner of the room. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a wall of monitors. Each screen displayed live footage from various cameras in Emily's house. Her bedroom, her bathroom, even the kitchen, all under Todd's watchful eye. Emily's stomach churned with revulsion. "You're sick," she spat, her anger giving her strength. "You're not going to get away with this." Todd's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "We'll see about that," he said, turning away. "But first, I have a little surprise for you." He pressed a button on the remote, and the monitors flickered. One of the screens showed a live feed of Sarah's apartment. Emily watched in horror as Sarah entered her living room, completely unaware of the camera hidden in her ceiling fan. "No!" Emily screamed, struggling against her restraints. "Leave her out of this." Todd ignored her, his eyes fixed on the monitor. "Sarah's always been a good friend to you, hasn't she?" he mused. "It's a shame she had to get involved." Emily's mind raced. She had to warn Sarah, had to get out of this nightmare. "Todd, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Let me go. You don't have to do this." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "It's too late for that," he said quietly. "You've seen too much." With that, he left the room, the heavy door slamming shut behind him. Emily was alone again, her mind whirling with fear and desperation. She had to find a way out, had to warn Sarah before it was too late. As she struggled against her restraints, she noticed a small, jagged piece of metal on the floor nearby. It must have fallen from one of the old tools on the wall. With painstaking effort, she managed to maneuver the piece into her hand and began sawing at the ropes binding her wrists. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, she felt the ropes give way. She freed her hands and quickly untied her ankles. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. She needed to escape, to stop Todd before he could hurt anyone else. Emily crept through the basement, careful to avoid making any noise. She found a small window near the ceiling and climbed up, prying it open with a piece of metal. The cold night air hit her face as she squeezed through the narrow opening and dropped to the ground outside. She was free, but the danger was far from over. Emily ran through the rain-soaked streets, her only thought to reach Sarah before Todd could. She prayed she wasn't too late. Days passed in a blur at the safe house, each one more tense than the last. Emily and Sarah tried to settle into a routine, but the constant presence of the police and the underlying fear made normalcy impossible. Every phone call, every knock at the door sent a jolt of panic through Emily. She couldn't shake the feeling that Todd was lurking, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows across the room, there was a knock at the door. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She exchanged a worried glance with Sarah before cautiously approaching. Through the peephole, she saw Officer Reynolds. She breathed a sigh of relief and opened the door. "Good evening, Miss Collins," Reynolds said, his expression grim. "May I come in?" "Of course," Emily replied, stepping aside to let him enter. Reynolds sat at the kitchen table with Emily and Sarah, his demeanor serious. "We've found more evidence at Todd's apartment," he said. "And we've uncovered something disturbing. Todd's been connected to a larger network of individuals who share and sell surveillance footage. He's not acting alone." Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "What does that mean? Are there more people involved in watching us?" "Possibly," Reynolds said. "We're still piecing everything together, but it's clear that Todd is part of a dark web operation. We have teams working around the clock to track down anyone associated with him." Sarah's face turned pale. "So, even if you catch Todd, there could be others out there still watching us?" "Yes," Reynolds admitted. "But we're doing everything we can to find and apprehend them. In the meantime, I need you both to be extremely cautious. Don't go anywhere alone, and report anything suspicious immediately." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "Is there anything we can do to help?" "Just stay vigilant," Reynolds said. "And trust us to handle the investigation." After Reynolds left, Emily and Sarah sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Emily's thoughts churned with fear and anger. Todd had stolen their privacy, their sense of security. And now, even with the police involved, the threat loomed larger than ever. That night, sleep was elusive. Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the horror she had uncovered. She thought about the other victims, people like her who had been unknowingly watched, their lives invaded. She couldn't let Todd and his associates get away with it. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Emily made a decision. She would fight back. She couldn't just sit and wait for the police to solve everything. She needed to take control. She slipped out of bed and quietly gathered her things. Sarah stirred and opened her eyes, watching her with concern. "Emily, what are you doing?" "I'm going to find Todd," Emily said, determination in her voice. "I can't just hide here while he and his accomplices are out there. I need to stop this." Sarah sat up, alarmed. "Are you crazy? It's too dangerous. Let the police handle it." "I can't," Emily said, shaking her head. "I need to end this nightmare, once and for all." Sarah sighed, seeing the resolve in Emily's eyes. "Then I'm coming with you. We're stronger together." Emily hesitated, but she knew Sarah was right. They had been through too much to face this alone. "Okay," she said. "But we need to be careful. We have to do this smart." They left the safe house quietly, making sure not to alert the officers on duty. They knew Todd's usual haunts, the places he might go to ground. As they drove through the city, the tension between them was palpable. Their first stop was Todd's old workplace, a rundown garage on the outskirts of town. The place was dark and abandoned, but Emily felt a flicker of hope. They parked a block away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. Inside, the garage was a maze of rusted equipment and discarded tools. Emily's flashlight cut through the gloom, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They searched carefully, looking for any sign that Todd had been there. In a corner, hidden beneath a pile of old tires, Emily found a small, locked box. Her heart pounded as she pried it open. Inside were stacks of photographs, USB drives, and a notebook filled with names and addresses. It was a treasure trove of information. "We need to get this to the police," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. But before they could leave, a sound echoed through the garage. Footsteps. Emily's blood ran cold. They ducked behind a workbench, holding their breath as the footsteps drew closer. A figure emerged from the shadows, Todd. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes scanning the room. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. They were trapped. Todd's gaze fell on the open box, and his face twisted with rage. "You shouldn't have come here, Emily," he snarled. "Now, you're going to pay for it." Emily's mind raced, searching for a way out. She glanced at Sarah, who nodded, her eyes filled with determination. They had to act fast, or they wouldn't make it out alive. With a sudden burst of courage, Emily grabbed a nearby wrench and hurled it at Todd. It struck him in the shoulder, and he staggered back, giving them a brief window of opportunity. They bolted for the door, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. Todd recovered quickly and gave chase, his footsteps echoing in the darkened garage. They burst outside, the cool night air hitting their faces. Emily fumbled for her keys, but Todd was gaining on them. Just as he reached them, a pair of headlights swept over the scene. A car screeched to a halt, and Officer Reynolds jumped out, his gun drawn. "Freeze," he shouted. Todd stopped, his eyes wild with fury. He lunged at Reynolds, but the officer was faster. A single shot rang out, and Todd crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg in pain. Emily and Sarah stood frozen, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Reynolds approached cautiously, keeping his gun trained on Todd. "Are you two okay?" he asked. "We're fine," Emily said, though her voice trembled. "Thank you." Reynolds nodded, his expression grim. "Let's get you back to safety." As they drove away, Emily felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Todd was in custody, but the fight wasn't over. They still had to dismantle the network he was part of, to ensure no one else would suffer the same invasion of privacy. But for now, they were safe. And together, they would see this through to the end. The safe house was swarming with police, the red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the walls. Emily and Sarah sat in the living room, huddled together, their nerves frayed from the night's events. Officer Reynolds was in another room, interrogating the masked intruder they had captured. After what felt like hours, Reynolds finally emerged, his expression a mix of triumph and concern. "We've identified him," he said, sitting down across from Emily and Sarah. "His name is Mark Thompson. He's been working with Todd for years, but he's not the Watcher." Emily's heart sank. "So, the Watcher is still out there?" Reynolds nodded. "But Thompson gave us a crucial piece of information. The Watcher is planning something big, and it's happening tonight. We have an address." A wave of dread washed over Emily. Where? Reynolds hesitated, then handed her a slip of paper. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. We're mobilizing a team to raid the place, but I need you two to stay here. It's too dangerous. Emily looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with determination. We're coming with you. Absolutely not, Reynolds said firmly. It's too risky. We've been part of this from the beginning, Emily argued. We deserve to see it through. And besides, if we don't go, the Watcher might slip away again. Reynolds sighed, seeing the resolve in their faces. Fine. But you stay in the van, no matter what. Understood? They nodded, and the team quickly mobilized. The drive to the warehouse was tense, the air thick with anticipation. As they approached, the massive, decrepit building loomed out of the darkness, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Reynolds turned to Emily and Sarah. Stay here. Keep the doors locked. They watched as the officers moved stealthily toward the building, weapons drawn. Emily's heart pounded as she stared at the darkened structure, her mind racing with what-ifs. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from inside the warehouse, followed by shouting and the sound of gunfire. Emily and Sarah exchanged a terrified glance, and despite Reynolds' warning, Emily couldn't just sit and wait. She opened the van door and crept toward the building, Sarah close behind her. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. They moved cautiously, the sounds of the raid echoing around them. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as they rounded a corner and came face to face with a terrifying scene. In the center of the warehouse, surrounded by monitors and surveillance equipment, stood a tall figure in a black hoodie. The Watcher. His back was turned to them, focused on a live feed from one of the cameras. Emily's blood ran cold as she recognized the feed. It was from the safe house. The Watcher turned slowly, his face hidden by a mask. Emily, he said, his voice distorted. I've been expecting you. Emily's hand tightened around the wrench she had grabbed from the van. This ends now, she said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. The Watcher laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the warehouse. You think you can stop me? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Before Emily could react, the Watcher lunged at her, knocking the wrench from her hand. They struggled, the fight intense and chaotic. Sarah tried to help, but the Watcher was too strong. Just as he was about to overpower Emily, a shot rang out. The Watcher stumbled, clutching his side. Officer Reynolds stood behind him, his gun smoking. It's over, he said, his voice steady. The Watcher laughed weakly, blood seeping through his fingers. You think this is the end? You're wrong. There are more of us. You'll never be safe. Reynolds moved swiftly, cuffing the Watcher and calling for backup. Emily and Sarah stood together, shaken but relieved. As the police secured the area and began dismantling the surveillance setup, Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. Back at the safe house, Officer Reynolds debriefed them. We've taken down the main players, he said. It'll take time, but we're confident we can dismantle the entire network. Emily nodded, exhaustion and relief washing over her. Thank you, Officer Reynolds. For everything. Reynolds smiled. You were incredibly brave. Both of you. Now, go home and get some rest. You've earned it. As they returned to their normal lives, Emily and Sarah felt a sense of peace they hadn't known in months. The nightmare was over, and though the scars would remain, they knew they were stronger for having faced it together. But late at night, when the world was quiet and shadows crept across the walls, Emily couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, wondering if somewhere, someone was still watching. The end.